There we go. Hey, everyone. I'm Tina Moore. I'm the Family Connections Director. It's my pleasure to welcome you to March's Live a Skillful Life. And I'm so excited on two reasons. One, we have Eric Ottinger back. And he was just here last week doing our Family Connection Skills reboot for Module 4. And I'm excited because he is my co-leader and we are leading a Family Connections class together. It's our fifth one. And Eric, you are in such a treat today and in for a treat today. Eric has been teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction to clinicians for more than 10 years. And so we know family connection skills, the basis, it starts with mindfulness, and we're going to learn from one of the best. So thank you all for being here. And Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you for the very kind introduction. So I am going to add some visual in the background. It's going to look like this. Can everybody see this now? Okay, great. So we've got connectivity. My name is Eric. I'm coming to you from Charlotte, North Carolina. Tina is my teaching partner in terms of family connections. Also, this is some material that I've taught to clinicians, very, very similar. Family members, people who are in treatment, people who are not in treatment. And I like to introduce it from this perspective, the umbrella of mindfulness, which has more than one meaning. There's the umbrella meaning that once you learn and are able to implement mindfulness, it certainly has a protective factor. And so we've seen mindfulness become much more integrated and widespread across all kinds of types of healthcare. Especially with the management of any kind of chronic disease, because we can get stuck in these automatic type of response patterns, which generate perpetual stress, chronic stress, and that taxes our systems a lot. And so one of the things mindfulness does is it helps us to kind of unravel these chronic stress reactions. It's very helpful in terms of overall health. Mindfulness also is certainly talked about at a very deep level within family connections and in some of its kind of clinical roots, which is dialectical behavior therapy. And from the perspective of family connections and DBT, that all skills really flow out of the ability to have mindfulness. So mindfulness, we can think of it in terms of it's a noun, it's this thing, but it's also a verb. It's something we can do. And it really has to do with what kind of awareness are we engaging in. The mind at times can be incredibly scattered, distracted, pulled in multiple directions. And at times you probably have noticed, regardless of stresses, there's still some moments that might emerge where your mind is less distracted, more focused, and better able to concentrate and stay on one single thing at a time. So from the perspective of mindfulness, this is actually a trainable skill. And that's what I'm going to introduce this as, is that mindfulness, in the way that I often talk about it, and a lot of people do in contemporary settings, is it's kind of like a mental workout, which can be learned and practiced and then developed. And a lot of the kind of amazing science that comes with mindfulness is in the new technologies that emerge over the past several decades that allow us to actually document functioning of the brain, take brain images. And then when you do things like mindfulness on a regular basis, actually have the ability to do some rewiring. So there's an incredible body of scientific evidence that is studying this thing called mindfulness that people have been doing for thousands of years. So those are our two kind of primary schools of mindfulness, long traditions that go back thousands of years, and very, very modern traditions of the Western scientific study of mindfulness as it applies to healthcare and psychology. So as you are already aware, our minds wander. They don't neatly sit still. That's not necessarily a problem. There's a reason why our minds wander, and that's what we're going to get into in the beginning to do from a family connections kind of perspective. A little bit of validation in that we have minds that wander, and that is quite understandable. So this is probably one of the most commonly cited studies, these two individuals at Harvard back in 2010, Killingsworth and Gilbert did this massive study where they were trying to get live time feedback, and they would contact people randomly and say, you know, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? And what's your emotional state? And they found that it's very, very common that this was not some type of DSM disorder or some type of illness, but just across the normal human population, we are very frequently not thinking about what we're doing. So that this mind wandering thing, that we're actually, the mind is going somewhere else above and beyond what we're doing in the moment, happens almost about half the time when we're awake. And what they discovered is that when we are not thinking about what we're doing, it's very highly likely that this has a direct impact on our emotional state. More likely to feel depressed, more likely to feel anxious, more likely to be engaged in things like worry. So I love this quote at the bottom: the ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that comes with an emotional cost. So that becomes the starting point. We have these amazing, amazing brains that have the ability to do all kinds of wonderful things, including imagining potential possibilities of the future, recalling things from a long time ago. And there's a time and a place where all of that can be highly beneficial. And there's also times and places where not being present and not being attentive and not being able to have the type of attention that is actually focused on what's happening can be very counterproductive, especially in relationships, because at a minimum level, we all want to be seen and heard and have the sense that somebody is paying attention to us and understanding us when we attempt to communicate. So mindfulness at a very fundamental level is going to be one of the most basic building blocks of how to have successful relationships and communicate and do things like validation. So let me take you behind the scenes a little bit. So let's understand at the most basic level, what's the nature of the mind? Job number one, stay alive. Eat lunch, don't be lunch. So it makes sense that we have a part of our minds that we are not going to be able to shut off, that is going to spend a lot of time looking for, scanning for problems, dangers, threats. We don't want to eliminate that, and we can't eliminate that. However, we can shape the mind, we can shape the attention so that we're not just perpetually stuck in, quote, what I call survival mind, where all we're doing is looking for the threat, the danger, the problem, and that perpetually activates this chronic stress response of flight or fight. Predicting, it also makes a ton of sense that we would have minds that would be wired to naturally attempt to predict what will happen next. There are times and there are places when that is incredibly valuable, as is the problem-solving mind. So we can, if you wanted to, you could say these would be maybe some states of mind that we could be in at any given moment: a predicting kind of mind, a problem-solving kind of mind. Excuse me. And certainly in family connections, one of the things that we look at deeply, and that I think It's Not About the Nail video illustrates this incredibly well. When we see a family member, a loved one, as a problem to be solved, when we get stuck in a problem-solving kind of mind, that can have really negative effects on relationships. It does create invalidation, it creates misunderstanding, it can create hard feelings. It certainly can create, as it does in that video, the sense of you are not seeing me, you are not hearing me, you are treating me as a problem to be fixed. So part of what we're going to do today is to just illustrate how we can increasingly, with some practice, become more and more aware of which state of mind that we are in, and start to give the mind some bumps. And I'm going to talk about that in terms of training. So we can train the mind. And when I talk about training the mind, I want you to think about training a puppy, that there's a kind of the nature of the mind and the nature of the puppy are very similar, that they are not really wired to sit still. They're not wired to just, take commands, so to speak. And so the mind and puppies both will wander. They will walk away. They will disobey, so to speak, because they're driven by more than just our desire to want them to sit still. And today is going to be about developing, instead of being stuck in survival mind, prediction mind, problem solving mind, to develop more and more of this awareness mind. And the kind of awareness mind that can get really untangled from automatic patterns of behaviors and thinking, automatic pilot, automatic reactions. And as we allow this thing to unfold, looking more and more, okay, so what is going on behind the scenes? With mindfulness, what are we doing? We're developing, trying to develop a certain kind of awareness. The kind of awareness that could emerge when we pay attention in particular ways on purpose, especially to what's happening right now. So this is just a little visual aid. This is not at all intended to be a literal interpretation of any kind of cognitive processes, but we do have this thing that's called attention. And it can be steered in many directions. And our attention is kind of like that flashlight that we could shine at various things. And really, really commonly when mindfulness is being initially taught, that the attention is deliberately guided towards our five senses. Here's why, at the most basic level, our five senses are always here and now. What we see, what we smell, what we touch, what we taste, and I've got the lungs there highlighted. It's incredibly common when people actually do mindfulness training, learning by doing, that one of the really common ways that that is done is that people are instructed to just feel your breath. Or that people learn mindfulness through a process of learning and doing yoga, noticing and feeling the physical sensations that emerge in the body as you move the body through a series of postures and stretches. And while we are attempting to deliberately guide the attention to the here and now, guess what continues to happen? The attention also is inevitably going to be pulled back to the kinds of things that a mind does. What are the kinds of things that a mind does that in Family Connections we have really tried to say, pay particular attention to these kinds of things that a mind does? It judges, it categorizes, it separates out. There's this and that, there's good and there's bad, there's right and there's wrong. It makes assumptions. It makes interpretations and it makes predictions. And so it's also then, with all of this stimulation that's occurring, accessing these big warehouses of memories, countless of, thousands and millions and who knows how many chunks of information it's accessing. So our minds are attempting to juggle a lot all at the same time, with the primary goal of trying to help us, really keep us safe, protecting us, activating emotions through these interpretations. And as we know in Family Connections, these emotions create action urges. And sometimes what we learn through Family Connections is that those action urges are actually not helpful in terms of what we want to do with our lives and relationships. So it might be a matter of, if we're able to gain awareness about judgments and emotions and what's going on up here, we can actually start to manage that process and not act on all these urges and not act on all these automatic processes, and sometimes maybe act opposite the urge or engage this thing called a wise mind. So this is our big picture, right? What is going on behind the scenes? A tremendous amount of a nervous system that is primarily wired to survive. And I'm going to pause in a moment. I want to give you some backdrop before we pause for any kind of potential discussion or conversation. And one of the obvious things that we're starting to notice at the most basic level is when you pay attention to your attention, or when you bring your awareness to your attention, we can start to notice that there's three likely spots that it could be. And if you want to look at this through the lens of relationships in particular, please do that. Because if we think about mindfulness of relationships, it's very easy that, okay, this thing is reminding me of this other thing that happened before. And we can get stuck in that, the activation of old memories. And then we're losing contact with what's happening now. And instead, we could be reacting to, experiencing emotions about, having judgments about something from the past. Again, what does a mind do? It predicts. It tries to figure out what's going to happen next. So it's very highly likely that as we're attempting to have a conversation with somebody that maybe we love dearly, the mind naturally starts to drift into, well, what if this happened? And what if that happened? And this might go wrong, and that might go wrong. And being able to bring it back into the present. Well, again, why is it that in mindfulness, it's so common that people talk about the breath and the body, that you sit and breathe, or you smell aromatherapy, or you touch something and bring your senses into this? Because it snaps us out of that, what can become a very daydream-like state of getting disconnected from the here and now. And I'm going to show you one more visual thing to really try to illustrate this point. So here we have literally somebody who is playing a game. But our minds can become so immersed in this daydream of what might happen that it activates our stress responses at this very, very deep level. And we can get oblivious to everything that's going on around us and just get completely lost inside of all the thoughts about, what about this? What if I do this? What then might happen? How could this go wrong? Judgments, emotions. So this mental landscape, it is so powerful that we can literally get detached from reality as it plays out in front of us. And part of one of the things we definitely discuss in Family Connections is the idea of pain and suffering. And that there's this little kind of math equation that suffering is pain plus non-acceptance. And the non-acceptance at a most basic level that we're going to start off again talking about today means that we're getting caught up in the judgments, right? How might this be good or bad or right or wrong or fair or unfair? So the chessboard is one analogy or a metaphor on all these things that we could get lost inside. I also like this as an analogy or metaphor when we're interacting with our own minds. What are we actually working with? It's a massive warehouse that all day, every day perceives, interprets, scans, identifies, stores and retrieves information. So if you want to think of it as like a warehouse or a computer, the thing I want to illustrate for you is this is not an error-free piece of machinery. It is easy to jump to conclusions. It is easy to predict inaccurately. It is easy to get wrapped up in judgments. It is easy to get wrapped up in the past. So normalizing, validating typical human experience, we do not process information perfectly. And so sometimes we're really just trying to slow down this process and bring our awareness to what is happening in the moment. So Family Connections, in a large part, is kind of a blueprint on how do you begin to manage your mental warehouse. You become a lot more aware of judgments and the impact that judgments have. You become aware of there is this thing called mindfulness, and that instead of judgments, to learn to practice the skills of observing and describing what's happening in terms of just the facts and being able to sort out and separate, oh, that's a judgment. That's not necessarily a fact, it's a judgment. So a lot of what we're going to do today is to try to figure out, what do we do with all these judgments? Okay. So at that point, I do want to pause because we are at 1:50, and my understanding is we're going to go until 2:30. That might be generating a lot of conversation, and I'm relying on my friends and family connections to maybe illustrate if there's a key question that we want to focus in on.
So if anyone has any questions, the chat is open. And while someone is sending a question, Eric, I have a question. Sometimes there's a...
You're allowed to ask questions too, Tina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will say, well, meditation is mindfulness. And then I've heard that people that have emotion dysregulation or BPD, that it's very hard for them to practice mindfulness. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that, or can clear up any myths or misperceptions about those two things.
No, it's a really good question. So mindfulness, it is something that I'm going to talk about. It's a trainable skill. One of the ways that it's a trainable skill is to actually do a meditation practice. So there's that kind of learning by doing, the experiential learning. Like if you want to learn how to swim, eventually it would make sense to get in the water. Before you do, we could have all kinds of classes about the way to move your body and understand what muscles are involved and what techniques are better and what's the nature of water and drag. And we could do all kinds of conceptual learning. And so this is the interesting thing about mindfulness, is that the Marsha Linehan mindfulness tradition is a very cognitive, conceptual way of learning mindfulness. It's a set of ideas that we understand intellectually and then apply. The opposite end of that school is just sit, notice your breath, and see what happens. And if you do that, one of the things that you'll notice is that training the puppy metaphor happens live in the moment. If you try to put your attention on anything, eventually it will naturally wander. And we can start to live in the moment go, oh, it's happening right now. My mind wandered. I'm thinking of the future. Judgment will arise. Like, I don't like this. I don't like sitting here trying to monitor my own breath. This sucks. I hate this. So live in the moment, judgments will kick in, expectations will kick in about this process. And so it's a way to get direct access to, what does your mind do? Our minds do all kinds of stuff. We can talk about it in terms of ideas and concepts. Your mind does this thing called judgments. Or if you want to know how it really happens, just sit still and try to focus on anything. And guess what's going to happen? Judgments will kick in, expectations will kick in, shoulds will show up, frustration will show up, all that stuff. So I think it's valuable to do it both ways in terms of learning. Learn it conceptually and also jump in the water every now and then and observe your own mind and what it's doing live in the moment.
It's kind of like that book knowledge or reading, and then the practical knowledge. You've got to do it to understand.
Both are helpful.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, both are helpful. But ultimately, I think within family connections, sometimes this kicks in that people realize, oh, like it's happening right now with my partner or with my kid. I'm judging them. It's happening as we speak. That's a judgment, and I'm getting angry. And because I'm angry and judging, I'm communicating ineffectively, and I'm invalidating them. That's the other side of mindfulness, is we see it as it happens live, and it creates that new sense of awareness. And we go, oh, it's not just a concept. I'm noticing it as it happens. I can catch it in the moment. Right. And do something different about it right now.
Yeah. I like that. We're watching it live. I do think we have a question in Jean, who is one.
Yeah, I'll jump in with this one from a participant. This is a very popular, related to what you've just been saying, Eric, but My daughter with BPD is stuck in the past, repeating past hurts or perceived wrongs at the middle of a conversation, and then starts to cascade with one wrong after another that I've done to her in the past. I can be mindful, but she hasn't gone through family connections. What is the best way to converse with someone in this state?
I would say that would, there's no simple answer to that other than family connections provides a full package of skills to be able to work with that more effectively. And I think that that's part of what we're doing today is to try to give somewhat of like a booster shot or to bring it back to life, get us back in contact with those things. So the obvious one that shows up in moments like this is the radical acceptance that we're not able to control other people's behaviors, but that we can focus in on our own responses and noticing in that moment how all these things that maybe I was just talking about can easily kick in. We, not our partners or children, develop habits and patterns of having relationships and communication and responding. And so that, as always, is going to be where the most fertile ground is, so to speak, in terms of changing a relationship dynamic, is that noticing how we might get stuck in habits and patterns of reacting as opposed to responding, getting drawn into what they're doing as opposed to attempting to manage, okay, how could I be skillful? How could I work with this effectively? It's incredibly hard. I mean, I think everybody wants this answer. Give me the traditional answer like we're taking a test. What do I do in these most difficult moments? And family connections and DBT is really, it's about learning and practicing a set of skills that allows us to work with whatever shows up.
And furthermore, can you give an example of applying mindfulness when your person with borderline traits dysregulates and it feels abusive to the, to me?
Well, certainly. So one of the things that automatically is going to come up, let's just do this. I am just going to bump over to the next slide as a way to kind of transition and build a bridge, because we can forever go through a series of, okay, if I'm dealing with somebody else and they do this, then what do I do? We're going to have to get back into the principles and the processes of mindfulness. So this is often how this is introduced as a collection of 3 primary skills. What are we doing? We do this thing called mindfulness. So we're trying to observe, and family connections gives lots of wonderful blueprints about all the different things that we can observe without avoiding, including our own vulnerabilities, our own emotional reactions, our own judgments, potentially how we get behaviorally dysregulated, doing and saying things that we could later regret because we weren't regulated. Instead of getting caught up, carried away, swept up in this thought stream, its judgments is the big obvious target, but it's more than just judgments. We make judgments, we make assumptions, we make interpretations. And then participating with awareness and skillful response. At the end of family connections, one of the really interesting things that I think this often leads to is we have this filtering system with Dear Man and Give and Fast to say in any given moment, we might in that moment value above and beyond anything and everything, maintaining the relationship with that person. And we then lean into validation, at least theoretically. That's not always going to be the case, though. You might, in that moment, depending on the context, need to be focused on another goal. Like, I need to go to work or I'm going to get fired. I can't do this with you right now. And that becomes priority. So validation of the other, an objective goal, Or also, the other thing is, after this interaction, how am I going to feel about myself? And what's going to be the status of my self-respect? And sometimes that takes priority. So again, I've heard, people saying this is kind of like playing jazz. We have this collection of skills, and that when life shows up, it's the ability to kind of flex. It's not one thing, it's not one answer, it's not one skill, but part of it is mindfulness, and part of it is wise mind, and part of it is the ability to observe and describe, and part of it is knowing, do I prioritize my self-respect or validating somebody else or a goal? That's why these questions are so hard, because often people want to say, in the scenario, what do I do? And this is Family Connections is more, it's a collection of skills and principles on how to maneuver through life, not a fill in the blank kind of thing. When my partner or kid does this, then we say, oh, do this. If it only were that simple, this would be so much easier.
Eric, do you have time just for one more quick practical question?
Yeah, let's do that, and then we'll add some additional information for 2:30 shows up.
Just if do you have any ideas, or can you give some examples? Speaking of meditation, there's a lot of people who can't meditate, or it's too much to meditate. Just some more practical daily type of mindfulness exercises.
So let's do this. Let's come back to this.
Or mindfulness practices, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah. So this will be, where does our attention get pulled at any given moment? Why is it that this thing, this centerpiece, the judgments, predictions, assumptions, interpretations, this is an uncomfortable place to be? In that, we're much more likely to be worried, anxious, remorseful, depressed, right? And so anything that returns our attention back to the here and now has potential value as a mindfulness exercise. So a lot of us learn this along the way when we're kids, have no idea you're practicing mindfulness when you're dancing or singing or playing a sport or playing a musical instrument, or eating food, or baking and cooking. There's so many things. So if you want to do little experiments that don't feel like they're traditional, sit in a chair and monitor your breath, try some of these practices out. The next time that you're brushing your teeth, it's a lot of people really daydream a lot when we do these things that we do all the time. So notice the smell of the mint, the temperature of the water, the feel of the toothbrush. Notice the next time that you take a shower, where's your mind? What's it doing? Is it already engaged in the future? A conversation at work later that day? Is it revisiting the past? Rehashing an old conversation? I could have said this, I could have done this, I should have said this. So in these basic things that often a lot of people do every day, when you brush your teeth, when you take a shower, when you eat your food, notice where your mind is. Are you caught up in a daydream? And so these are very practical things. If you go outside and walk, feel the movement of the air, feel the warmth of the sun. Notice the sounds that are around you. So there's a lot of ways to do this. There's a lot of ways to do this. At the most basic level, mindfulness is deliberately moving the attention to the here and now, the 5 senses. If you're doing that, you're doing mindfulness.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to get back into, so this is something that probably many of you have seen some version of this showing up in Family Connections. Trying to practice this skill observing and describing. So same thing I talked about. This is it's a concept. It's an intellectual idea that we can say, okay, there's this observe and describe thing. The skill is doing it live in the moment. And then if we're able to do this, then we're more likely to participate. You know, we don't get zoned out. We don't get tuned out. We're not caught up in this daydream. We can attempt to be aware and skillful. And just to, again, trying to broad brushes, what's the landscape that we're dealing with? Definitely one of the things we're dealing with is automatic pilot. It makes sense that we have automatic pilot. Why? Well, it conserves time and energy, and that our mind, our nervous system is going to take some shortcuts. It's going to very quickly try to identify whatever it is that we're picking up on, identify it, categorize it, figure out how should we respond. And so one of the names I have up here is Dr. Judson Brewer, and he wrote a book called The Craving Mind. He talks in terms of habit loops, and we all have habit loops. And what are we doing with these habit loops that we tend to have these patterns that perpetuate automatically, essentially operating on reactions, impulses, emotions, kind of, you know, automatically, chronically? Well, we're trying to say, let's break some of these automatic habits just by bringing attention and awareness to this machinery. And then we can respond instead of reacting. And that we all have cravings to do all kinds of stuff. We all have urges to do all kinds of stuff. We don't have to always follow the urges. We don't have to always act on a thought as if the thought were an absolute fact. So if we start to get away from automatic pilot, then we're much more likely to now engage in responding. Responding is giving us a chance to actually practice some of these skills you learn in family connections live, and not being caught up in, when this happens, this other stuff just kicks in automatically. All right. So what else does the mind do? This obvious big broad strokes on the landscape. Judgments, a gigantic focus within the context of family connections. So again, it makes sense that we have the kind of mind that's able to judge, it's able to discriminate, this is different than that. So this is one of the ways that this has been explained to me that it makes sense, that we actually have two layers of experience happening all the time. I call this the play-by-play commentary analogy. If you were to watch any kind of sporting event, a live sporting event on TV, there are two things that are simultaneously happening. There's the game itself, and there's the play-by-play commentary. You could turn the volume all the way off on the play-by-play commentary, and the game would still be occurring. So as you're dealing with your loved ones, your coworkers, your family, there's this nonstop narrative, play-by-play commentary that's just unfolding in the background. And that's part of what we're starting to unveil, is that with mindfulness, we start to realize, oh yeah, nonstop thinking, nonstop judging, nonstop evaluating, nonstop assuming. It could be automatic blaming, automatic criticizing, thinking about what happened it's a lot going on. And so some of the things that help me, this is something I borrowed from somebody else. They use the term word prisons. What are some of the obvious word prisons that we get caught up in? The shoulds, the goods and the bads, the rights, the wrongs, the fair, the unfair, because they keep us stuck. And part of the antidote for this, for the shoulds and the nonstop narrative, is this thing we call beginner's mind. To see things like a child would see them, to see them as if they were brand new, as if we weren't the expert, and completely understand exactly what's happening and exactly what should happen next. So as we try to unravel all this automatic stuff that's been just playing, it's the operating system in the background. And it's so great that we have an operating system, but it's not perfect. It's an operating system that's been wired. It's ancient. It's pretty ancient, and it's really primarily based on survival and living in a different kind of environment than we as humans have now gravitated towards over the last several generations, as compared to millions of years of evolutionary process of survive. What's the problem? What's the threat? Where's the danger? So yeah, we judge. So now, here's the deal. You're not going to be able to eliminate judgment. And this, I think, is one of the chronic sticking points when people learn mindfulness. They say things like, I can't do it. I can't do that mindfulness stuff. I can't do that meditation stuff. I tried it and I still judged. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to still judge. Your mind will still wander. You will still blame, you will still criticize, but you can know it. Not as like you're seeing the world through like this judgment from the operating system is a fact. It's reality. Now we can say, oh, judgment. That's judgment. That's blaming. That's criticism. That's jumping to conclusions. I hope that this is making sense, at least on a minimal level, that mindfulness does not become this thing that eliminates judgment. It's a way to see judgment for what it is. It's a judgment. It's not a fact. So we start seeing thoughts are not facts and emotions are not facts and assumptions are not facts. We start to see them for what they are and then can work with them more effectively. One of the primary ways, one of the basic skills that's built into family connections is this right here. We're trying to break up these automatic patterns. The stop skill, literally slowing this thing down, not responding automatically. Pausing, stop, freeze. Don't hit the send button on that text or that email or make that phone call. Try to understand what's happening. Then observing, noticing, like, what are the kinds of things of family connection? What are the lessons in there? Well, maybe we're an emotion mind. And one of the big cautions within family connections is don't make these big decisions when you're strictly an emotion mind. Don't follow those urges. Noticing, okay, that the emotions that are present, they do have energy to them. They do push you in a direction. They do initiate action often, but that action might not be skillful or effective. As we're pausing, noticing, hey, what judgments are showing up? And the judgments can do all kinds of things, including pushing us into secondary emotions where we don't even know what we're feeling. Judgments can push us into expressing ourselves and communicating inaccurately. So now it gets harder for the other person to understand and validate our perspectives. And so we're really at one of the essential levels. We're trying to slow down these automatic processes and recognize, okay, family connections allows opportunities to say, okay, we can grab a hold of judgments. We could focus on emotion regulation. We could focus on validation. There's a lot of things that you can do to try to slow down this runaway train that perpetuates old relationship and communication patterns that actually make things worse instead of better. we have a big group, so it's hard to know when to pause and when to continue. I'm just going to rely on, we have 15 minutes left. If there's really a key question that feels relevant, somebody just stop me. Okay. Is that going to work?
I think so. Doreen and Jean.
There, one participant did ask if you could speak of, talk about beginner's mind, how that might be relevant to mindfulness.
Yeah, so beginner's mind, again, as a basic teaching point, I'm going to compare two things. There is what we call expert mind. And in the mind of the expert, there are much less possibilities. The mind of the expert tends to be much more judgmental. There's a lot more shoulds. So when I think of beginner's mind, I especially think of going for a walk in the woods with my niece and my nephew when they were 3 and 5. Everything, every bug, every rock, every stick, everything else that somebody else would call garbage, trash, to them was interesting. And that's really what we would do. We would just go for walks together and look at the stuff and be interested and find things, other things that people would call trash often, and would just call litter and say and to them it was treasure. Like every little flower, every bird, it's interesting, it's fascinating, because being able to see it through new eyes, unjaded eyes. So when I say the beginner's mind, to really think about, we do get jaded with this, right? Because now we can start looking at other people through our mental warehouse that we've collected maybe for decades, seeing them through a whole bunch of shoulds, a whole bunch of expectations, a whole bunch of judgments. Beginner's mind says, this moment right now has never happened. Can we actually see it through that lens? This is a new moment filled up with all kinds of possibilities. Can we see this new moment as a new moment, as opposed to just seeing it through the lens of prior lived experience or expectations about how it should be? So that's the beginner's mind. I always think of the mind of a young child who is literally experiencing things for the first time. And there's a sense of kind of fascination and wonder and awe that comes with that, because it's new. It's actually new. If you want to really understand what mindfulness is, look at 3, 4, and 5-year-olds when they see things for the first time. They're not caught up in a bunch of judgments and expectations. They are actually seeing it and experiencing it for what it is, often through their 5 senses, not a collection of judgments and interpretations. And so here's the thing there's a couple core ideas. Beginner's mind is one of those core ideas that you can certainly look up. What do some of the experts on mindfulness have to say about beginner's mind? There are whole libraries written on beginner's mind. So I can't fully do it justice, but I'll try, right? That's what I think of. I think of little kids. So, but us as adults in family connections, certainly judgment is one of the things that we're working with. So we're not going to be able to eliminate it. So instead of eliminating it, what are we doing? We're trying to let it go. We're trying to recognize it, see it for what it actually is. It is an interpretation or a prediction, a should, a labeling of good or bad. And we try to let go of it, and that this is an ongoing process. We're not done. You're never done. Like, I did it. I conquered judgments. Nope. Sorry, your nervous system is just not wired that way. So this is interesting. Steve Hayes, another very influential clinician in terms of applying mindfulness to clinical systems. I love this quote from him. There's no delete button in our nervous system. We don't get to get rid of judgment, right? We don't get to get rid of expectations, but you can get more skillful at recognizing it when it shows up and working with it when it shows up. So mindfulness, in terms of, it's certainly trying to bring a certain kind of awareness, a certain kind of attention, a certain kind of monitoring. Like, what would you monitor? How am I communicating with this person that I love? How am I communicating with this person that the way that I treat them, the way that I speak to them, creates the environment that I now have to live into? So mindfulness at a minimum within family connections, I definitely think about this, is what are all these thoughts you're having about you and your partner? I use the word partner very generically, your communication partner. They might actually be your romantic partner. They might be a family member. They might be a coworker. They might be a friend. But we do this in transactions with partners, right? Just noticing all the thoughts I'm having about me and all the thoughts I'm having about you is a giant leap forward in terms of mindfulness within the context of relationships and communication. So I'm going to bump forward. This is, again, reminder, it's not about the nail video. What's a core key message in that is that sometimes fixing and problem solving is the problem. So nature of the mind, what does it do? It does work hard to identify and solve problems. It is wired in this way to identify and solve problems and go into problem solving. That's not always going to be the mode of mind that's going to be effective with another human being. So sometimes this is talked about in terms of there's being mode and doing mode. And this problem solving mode is the doing mode. The doing mode is the part of you that has a never ending to-do list. It doesn't matter how much you get done. That list stays infinitely long. That's the do, go, should. There's a never-ending series of tasks to be undertaken, things to be done, and problems to be solved. And part of what mindfulness does is it allows us to engage in just a being mode. Because again, the doing, go, do, solve doesn't always work. We can't just steamroll through life, fixing and problem solving everything and everyone. Eventually, we're going to run up against some things that we can't fix or don't know how to fix. And fixing will actually will make it worse. So putting down the problem solver temporarily, that's a potential mindfulness tool. So this will speak to some of the things that were brought up, so doing mindfulness, practicing mindfulness. This is the analogy, we've kind of culturally come around where people understand it's really, really common. We have gyms and yoga centers and walking and running trails and biking trails that our physical body can be tuned up, so to speak, given a workout, shaped up, enhance its performance by some type of deliberate training. Well, that's what mindfulness really is. It can be done sitting in a chair, focusing on your breathing. It can be done in a yoga class with a formal teacher, or it can be done more in these types of settings where we say, look, anywhere, under any conditions, you can start to notice what's happening with my attention. Where is it? What's my mind doing? What's it focusing on? And sometimes it's really, really wide and broad and scattered, and we're trying to multitask. And there's moments when we can bring the attention in and become much more laser focused. One of the things we want to notice and focus on Am I noticing what's happening now, or am I getting caught up in future thoughts, past thoughts? By doing this repeatedly, we can actually strengthen in the same way that we would strengthen other parts of the body through a repetitive, systematic practice. And this can be documented with some of the newer medical technologies that are parts of the brain, which actually are shapeable, trainable, plastic. Some parts can grow and some parts can shrink, depending on what we do. On here, I've got the phrase domesticating the amygdala. So the amygdala is one of the parts of our brains very linked into emotions, particularly fear and threats and worry and stress response. And so we have an alarm system. We have a very, very old, antiquated alarm system in our brains called the amygdala. And it often goes off in a way that is completely disproportionate to what's actually happening. So these perpetual fight or flight kind of reactions where our nervous system goes, yeah, you should freak out, but fight or flight. I think a lot of us have learned that's just not effective in terms of human relationships, especially trying to figure out meeting emotional dysregulation with a fight or flight response is a great recipe for catastrophe. So this is the flip side of changing, fixing, problem solving is sometimes we notice. And we notice and understand what's happening. And the change flows out of that as opposed to trying to fix, change, and problem solve. So when you do judge, which you will, judge yourself, you're going to judge your partner, you're going to judge your kids. See if you can be nice to yourself and maybe not judge the judging and judge yourself and get too wrapped up in that and just puppy. It's like training a puppy, right? Don't kick the puppy. Don't yell at the puppy. The puppy does what a puppy does. The mind does what a mind does. It wanders. It judges. It speculates. It predicts. It daydreams. It fantasizes. It does all this stuff. It does all this stuff.
Eric?
Yes.
And I think we have like 3 minutes left. I just wanted to mention what's coming up in March, and then I have a question for you. If someone in attendance today, they want to start a mindfulness practice, a daily practice, where do you recommend? How do you start? How do you
There are a lot of different things. It depends on what level of commitment that you want to go to. So if you wanted to, there's actually a lot of pretty free resources that you could tap into via things like YouTube and Google. If there's one single name that I think people should know who has really integrated the science of mindfulness into healthcare and made it mainstream across the world, John Kabat-Zinn, spelled with a K and is Z-I-N-N. He has lots of books and lots of tapes and lots of, hours and hours and hours and hours of free lectures, free guided mindfulness that you could tap into. One of the books that he has written is Mindfulness for Beginners. So that's my perspective, right? Some other people have other perspectives. There are certainly, if you want to, in some of your areas, you can go and find somebody who's professionally trained and go through a course and pay money for it. Those are also available online. So it depends on how serious you are, what your resources are. Doing that kind of thing is going to be a very different experience. If you're willing to make a commitment, I know that those kind of things do change people's lives. But not everybody's going to be there where they want to commit that level of money and time and effort into saying like, well, I'll take an 8-week formal class. So there's a lot of options on how to get started.
Fantastic. Well, Eric, we just have a minute. Thank you. I just want to thank you so much again. Some wonderful comments in the chat. We just appreciate you so much. And everyone, I'm going to put a link in the chat real quick. and that will take you to the alumni programming for March. The next thing that is on the agenda is next Tuesday, March 15th. We will welcome Cindy Finch. She is a clinician and also author of a book entitled When Grief is Good, and that's our Beyond FC program. And then on Wednesday, March 30th, we will have Family Connection Skills Reboot for Module 5, validation, which is really mindfulness and then validation. So you all perfect in sync. Okay, Doreen, did you want to say something about recording? No, are you good?
I think we're okay.
Okay, fantastic. Everyone, this recording will be available probably in about a week, and you should get an email from Zoom with that. And then also, if you have the link for our alumni recordings, it will be posted also in about a week, where you can find Eric's skills reboot from February and all of the other presenters in the past month. So everyone, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And Eric, it's always a pleasure. And I'll see you next week.
I'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.